welcome everyone to Rogers State University, especially to those of you who are visiting the campus and the community. We want to especially welcome you and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Paul Eicher, and I'm the Director of Student Development and the advisor for the Student Secular Alliance. And so I'll be moderating tonight's debate. I apologize, I'm not speaking with the microphone, so I'm just going to try to project. I won't say very much, and then I'll try to get out of the way for the debate. I did policy debate for about 15 years in junior high, high school, college, and still have a connection to it. So this event is especially cool for me. I like to promote the clash of ideas, and I think a college environment is the perfect place for people to be able to express their perspectives, to explore new ideas, and to have this kind of clash of ideas. So I'm very glad you guys came out tonight. I think we're going to have some really great discussion and debate, and at the end of it, I think we'll have a little bit of opportunity to engage with our speakers as well. Before we get started, I'll explain kind of the rules and format for the evening, but first I want to invite Jennifer Stemmer, who's the president of the Student Secular Alliance, up to introduce our speakers. And I'll take just a brief moment to brag on this organization, because the Student Secular Alliance is a new student organization here at RSU, and tonight is the Student Government Association annual awards banquet. And so unfortunately a lot of those people couldn't be here, but I found out today that the Student Secular Alliance was going to win the Best New Organization Award. And I think they have been incredibly involved this year, volunteering in the community, going to a lot of different fundraisers, walks, awareness campaigns, a lot of different stuff. And so I'm especially proud of this group of students. And so with that, I'd like to invite Jennifer to come introduce our speakers, and then we'll run through a format of the evening.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so happy to look around and see that we've almost filled up this room. That's just overwhelming to me. So thank you guys so much for being here. First, I'll introduce our theist speaker. He was brought here by Oklahoma Apologetics Alliance. You can find them on their website, oklahomaapologetics.com, or their Facebook page, Oklahoma Apologetics Alliance. Dr. David Litt is a member of the Society of Christian Philosophers and the Evangelical Philosophical Society. A former atheist, David became a Christian after examining the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He is a contributor to the books Evidence for God, 50 Arguments for Faith from the Bible, History, Philosophy, and Science, Defending the Resurrection, and True Reason, Christian Responses to the Challenge of Atheism. He lives with his wife Marie and his 5 sons, Lucien, Blaise, Reed, Paley, and Kepler. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced one of their names.
Perfect.
Sweet. And now our atheist speaker, sponsored by Secular Student Alliance and Student Government Association of RSU. Eric Murphy is the full-time Director of Communications for the atheist community of Austin during the day, as well as a host for Top Heathen, along with his co-host Jamie Boone. After having watched the atheist experience for 8 years, when he moved from California to Austin in 2015, he immediately started volunteering for the ACA. Since first stepping foot into the Free Thought Library, he has helped to shape the ACA and the atheist movement through social media and activism. Eric is doing his part to help promote a positive atheist culture and build a much-needed community. In his spare time, he enjoys talking with both theists and atheists, continued education in philosophy and religion, and has never turned down gin from a fan.
Long walks on the beach. No, I'm sorry.
And Paul Eicher.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Just a brief commentary before we get started, and I'll run through the format as well, but we want this to be a respectful debate, so we don't want any disruption from the audience. And I know you guys all look like friendly, respectful people who are here to have to listen to a nice clash of ideas in a debate, but if we have any disruptions, you'll get one warning and then you'll be asked to leave. There is a time at the end of the debate for some engagement with the speakers, so you'll have an opportunity to ask questions or to visit discussion points if you think you'd like to have something addressed. But that's kind of our general house rules for the evening. Other Other than that, the format for the event will be, I think it's going to take us maybe about an hour and a half is what it takes. We'll have 20-minute opening statements from both parties, and then we will have 12-minute first rebuttals from each, moving to a second rebuttal that will last 8 minutes, and then a 5-minute conclusion from both parties. Eric will be going first, David second, and at the end of the formal part of the debate, we will have an informal discussion or sort of crossfire with the audience and allow for questions that can last really as long as you guys are engaged and kind of want that to go. So, with that being said, please help me welcome our speakers one more time. And thank you all again for being here. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way for Eric to begin.
All right. Thank you so much. I really do want to start off by thanking RSU for having us. I want to thank Jen and the Secular Student Alliance for having us. I'm thrilled. I'm really, really stoked. David, what did you get yourself into? This is my first debate, right? I love it. I'm glad you're here. So yeah, be patient with me. I'm going to get through it the best I can. I probably won't take all 20 minutes, but we'll see. Okay, so the topic of tonight's debate is it rational to accept Christian theism? Is it rational to accept Christian theism? So let's break it down just a little bit. We could have done a debate about atheism, about atheist positions. We're not doing that tonight. We're specifically talking about the Christian claim. So, how do we do that? How do we evaluate? How do we determine whether or not something is rational? Well, there are two different definitions of rational that come to mind. The first is whether or not it's internally consistent, but I don't think that's really very useful in this context, especially because Harry Potter is internally consistent, and we're not really having Harry Potter debates. This is something far more important. So let's look at what else something is when it's rational. When a thing is rational, we determine it's rational because we've determined that it has sufficient evidence to be accepted. And so how do we determine what is sufficient evidence? People can determine, whether or not the evidence is sufficient is going to be up to you tonight. Give me a break, give me just a second. It's going to be up to you tonight. And I want to help you along that path because I'm going to be evaluating it with you. And we can look together at whether or not it's going to meet that burden of evidence. So, David, there are a couple of things that when I looked at this, I really, really wanted to figure out, how am I going to determine whether or not the Christian theist position is rational? There are a bunch of different types of Christianity, and there are a bunch of different types of claims that they make. So I wanted to break it down to some core components. I think that if we can get over those hurdles, we can be a whole lot closer to determining whether or not it's rational. I want to start with the concept of original sin. That's something that's found throughout the different Christian denominations. It goes back to Adam and Eve and partaking of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. That's something that you have to take as literal to get original sin, right? To have the introduction of sin into the world, that thing which Christ died for, according to the book. If it's just an allegory, why would Jesus die for it? Why would it matter to you? Why would we be standing here if it wasn't there? But we know that there was never a time, if you study evolution, you would know that there was never a time when there was just one man and one woman. Heck, if the population ever got that small, the lack of genetic diversity would doom the species altogether. It never got that low. So when was it? Where was it? Was there a time that God said, okay, go? how do we make that determination? Were things not immoral if, was murder okay before then? It's really fuzzy. And I think that we have a right to find out whether or not that is a rational claim, right? That's built into Christianity. So let's look for that answer. Inherited sin is another thing. So for the story, it's not just Adam and Eve who were cursed for breaking the rules. It's every one of their descendants, right? How does that make any sense? How's that fair? I mean, if somebody's just going to say, well, it's fair because God says it, well, then we really don't have any purpose standing up here and talking about it. But to apply this in another way, that would be like saying, well, this person owes me money. I give this person $5, and so from now until the end of time, all of their children are going to owe me money as well. It doesn't work that way. So that's the first, original sin. The next is, the Trinity. David, I didn't ask you, are you a Trinitarian? Awesome. All right, then I can bring this one up. Otherwise, I'd cross it out, and we'd have a much shorter debate. So, the Trinity. Let's break it down, right? You have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. They're all unique, separate beings, and yet they're all the same. So in order for us not to break the laws of logic, we would need to come up with an explanation. And I have not yet been able to find a way for us to rationalize it. Either, I've heard the explanation, well, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That's like saying Eric the brother, Eric the coworker, Eric the best friend. Those are all different descriptors of me. So maybe it's just that, but that means that I'm one person. That is not what the Trinity is. The Trinity is three distinct, separate beings all wrapped up into one. How does that work? How does that not break the laws of logic? How do you not quickly fall into, well, if they are three distinct beings, then that would be polytheism, and this would not be a Christian debate. If they're all different characteristics of a single entity, then you are not a Trinitarian. This is something that we should be able to answer. If you're accepting Christian theism, you're accepting that the whole bundle. And so it's not unreasonable to ask why that is, right? You should be able to know. I should be able to know. We should be able to find out together. So that's my next question, the Trinity. Finally, I want to talk about the existence of the soul. I mean, let's be clear, without a soul, there's no theism. The entire story is about the damnation of humans and saving them from hell, saving them to heaven, right? The sacrifice and all of that talks about the soul. I think we should be able to determine whether or not a soul is likely before we can determine whether or not accepting Christian theism is rational. So what is the soul? Well, let's look at its characteristics, right? You know what? No, let's start somewhere else. You see, I was talking to Matt, and we started trying to do math with souls. And it kind of got difficult because I've heard the position that the soul enters the body at the moment of conception. I'll throw that out if that's not what you believe. Does the soul enter the body at the moment of conception?
Never put my foot down in a certain area, but sounds good.
Cool. All right. So if the soul enters the body at the moment of conception, well, we have been able to determine through, just watching how gestation, how all of this happens. And there are some times when the embryo splits and you get twins. So does an extra soul come in? Or do they have to share the same one? Is it split? Is there half a soul? Is there one that doesn't have a soul? Can you have a body without a soul? And then, okay, well, if you've got the split, but then sometimes the other, one of the twins will absorb the other in utero. So then what happens? Do you have two souls sharing one body? Or maybe one soul just, tough luck, back to the line, maybe try again. I don't know. Did somebody get screwed out of the chance of a life because an embryo split? Right? And let's move on to what happens in life. We've been able to determine that traumatic brain injuries drastically impact the personality of people. You see it. You see people who sustain damage to different parts of their brains, and their tastes change, their personalities entirely change, right? If you take a look at different degenerative illnesses as people grow older, the myelin breakdown around those synapses in your brain, it starts to break down, and it starts to drastically impact the personality, who this person is. So what happened to the soul? Is the soul not that thing that gives you your personality? Because you can cut that out of your brain. Did the soul change? Is it trapped somehow? If it's trapped, then what's operating the body? And even if you look at a perfectly healthy body, how would a soul interact? If you're expecting a soul, if you're expecting a soul to be able to control the body, how does the ghost interact with the machine? There's no need for it. But in order for us to rationally accept Christian theism, you should be able to determine whether or not there's a soul, because then you have more work to do from there. But we can start there tonight. We have these three things that I brought up, right? We have original sin, we have the Trinity, we have the existence of the soul. And to the best of my ability, I've not been able to see a satisfactory response to any of those. And so you could not justify to me that it's rational to accept it, because there is not sufficient evidence to support the claims that are built into it, right? When you have, what is original sin? What is it? Don't know. It's magic. God will sort it out. The Trinity, what is it? Don't know. It's magic. God will sort it out. 3, existence of the soul and the nature of the soul. What is it? Don't know. It's magic. God will sort it out. If you appeal to mystery, that's not rational. If you expect that, I just have to trust God, that's your decision. I'm not here to take it away from you, but I will tell you that you're not making a rational decision in accepting that theism. And, well, I don't want to beat a dead horse. So, David, the challenge is over to you. I really, really hope that we can get through some of these, because I really do want to find out, and maybe we can find out together tonight. Thank you.
Check, check. Is that good? Check. Well, good evening. I'd like to thank the Oklahoma Apologetics Alliance and the Secular Student Alliance for sponsoring this debate. I didn't know there were so many alliances in Oklahoma. It's like Game of Thrones out here. I'd also like to thank Eric for representing the atheist position in this clash of alliances.
No spoilers.
Arya, no, okay. You heard me say Arya? All right. Sir Isaac Newton, considered by many to be the greatest scientist of all time, once said, "Atheism is so senseless and odious to mankind that it never had many professors." What a jerk thing to say. So we can look around right now and see atheists all over the place, proving that Sir Isaac Newton wasn't as smart as everyone thinks. kind of moron would call atheism senseless and odious. Odious is an SAT word, it means repulsive. Kind of a jerk thing to say, stupid Isaac Newton. But today, again, we say atheists all over the place. All right, pleasantries complete. Transition to topic. Is it rational to accept Christian theism? Yes, it is. In debates, we normally give reasons for our positions, and the opposition raises objections. Here in my opening statement, we'll get to I'll do the best I can with his questions in the rebuttal period. Here in the opening, wanted to talk a bit about why I happen to believe that Christian theism is rational. When I think about why I believe in Christian theism, it's not just a list of reasons. It has more to do with my previous worldview collapsing under the weight of reality, and Christian theism providing the foundation for rationality and rescuing me from mental chaos. So here in my opening, I'm going to put all my cards on the table and tell you how I became convinced that Christian theism is true, and then we'll go into more detail on the questions and objections afterwards. It was a dark day in 1981. I was 5 years old, and my mother received a phone call, and she turned to me with tears in her eyes and told me that my dog Goliath had been run over by a bus, a little raggedy mutt that I'd had as long as I have memories. And so I looked at my mom and her tears in her eyes, and I thought, so what, it's just a dog. And I thought there was something weird that my mom was actually sad over a dog, like there was something wrong with her. But I soon noticed that other people got sad when something died, their pets or their family members. It seemed really weird to me. I mean, if you didn't know that it was going to die, you're stupid. And crying about it is not going to change the fact that it's dead, so what in the world are you crying over? People just didn't make sense to me. I spent the next decade or so observing people's behavior when their pets or friends or family members died, and I concluded that people must simply be wired to be irrational, to behave in really weird ways. Then during the summer of after 10th grade, my best friend from elementary school, a guy named Jimmy Lindholm, died while parasailing. He talked, the whole time we were growing up, he talked about wanting to go parasailing. He finally gets to go parasailing, his harness breaks, whoosh, dead. And I walked away after knocking on his door and finding this out, walked away, and I noticed that I had the exact same reaction that I'd had when my dog died, namely, well, so what, he was going to die anyway. But this time it was different. It seemed like I should be bothered by my friend dying. And so briefly I started wondering if there was something wrong with me instead of something wrong with everyone else. After pondering this for several months, I realized why I was different. I had evolved to a higher stage of humanity. These pathetic little emotions the rest of you have, they're like vestigial tails left over from primitive life forms. But humanity 2.0 was here, unfettered by emotions. And so you earlier models were now all obsolete. I had a life-changing experience the following summer. I was running from the police in the middle of the night, and they had me surrounded on 3 sides. And the other side was the Monongahela River. So I jumped into the river and swam across and ran up the hill on the other side, and I eventually emerged from a patch of woods. And in front of me was this beautiful garden. And out of habit, I started to walk around the garden, but I paused to philosophize. And I started thinking to myself, wait a minute, I don't care about the people in that house, let alone their vegetables. Why am I being so courteous by walking around their garden? I was being courteous because I'd been brainwashed into acting that way by society. And so as I stomped my way through that garden, I got this incredible rush of freedom, like I'd been on a leash my entire life. I'd been breaking the law for years, but I realized that my behavior was still being manipulated the entire time by all these little rules that we absorbed the entire time we're growing up. So I got this rush of freedom, and If you really want to break out of that, if you really want to break out of that brainwashed state that you're in, it seems to me that you kind of have to do the opposite of what you've been told. Aristotle said if you've got a stick bent too far in one direction, you want to straighten it, what do you have to do? You bend it in the other direction, nice and far. So, decided to do the opposite of what I'd been taught, to cleanse myself of all this contamination, and that became the central goal of my life. Long story short, I ultimately ended up in a mental hospital for bashing my dad's head in with a hammer. Police later took me out of the mental hospital and put me in jail. I moved around in the jail for a while and then got sent to another mental hospital, then back to jail. In one block in the jail that I was in, I met a Christian named Randy. Randy was a criminal who had become a Christian and then went to police and turned himself in for everything he'd ever done. So they charged him with 21 felonies based on his confession. Now, Randy seemed like he was from another planet. There would be a fight in the dorm, and he would turn away and start praying that it stops, which was really wild because I mean, that was our main form of entertainment in there, was watching the fights. This guy's praying against it. So, wow, Christians cracked me up. In those days, however, I was not fond of Christians. I was an atheist before it was cool to be an atheist. Now, before there were alliances. Now, I understand that most of you atheists live perfectly normal lives, but back then I couldn't figure out why anyone would want to. I mean, think about it. We've got this massive universe, and over here is this tiny little crumb of a galaxy we call the Milky Way. And out on one of those spiral arms of the Milky Way is this pathetic little ball of hot gas, and circling that pathetic little ball of hot gas is this tiny speck of dirt we call Earth, and crawling all over the Earth are these disgusting lumps of cells who thinks that everything they do is so important. But the universe couldn't conceivably care less whether you love your neighbor as yourself or torture him to death for fun. So you might as well do whatever you feel like doing with the time you've got. And what are you atheists going to do with your 70 or 80 years? Let me guess, you're going to go to school for a while, get a job, maybe pick up a family along the way, then retire someday, and then die from old age or because you catch a disease and it hurts to pee. How original. You guys are the free thinkers here, right? Well, some people don't want to live like that. Some people don't want to follow this pattern we're all expected to mindlessly follow. Some people would just rather bash someone's head in. And why shouldn't they? Because it's wrong? Says who? Your grandma? Hollywood? Society? If you atheists would take the tiniest bit of that skepticism that you apply to religious claims and apply them to your own moral claims, they would crumble instantly. And any appeals to right and wrong after that would seem laughable. That was my thinking as I looked across the block and saw Randy lying on his bunk, reading his Bible. So I walked up to him and I said, "You know why you're reading the Bible, right? You're reading the Bible because you were born in the United States. If you've been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. Because people like you believe whatever you're taught to believe." Does that sound familiar? I'm sure most of the atheists have thought that, at least, about some of their Christian friends. I, however, was a complete hypocrite for saying that to Randy, because I believe things like, the universe exploded out of nowhere and life formed on its own, and consciousness is simply particles interacting, and I believe that Jesus' disciples spread the story of his resurrection because they wanted to make something up to keep his movement going and so on. I believed all these things without ever having done any serious examination of the evidence, which means that I just believed a lot of things that I was taught to believe when I was growing up. But it's easier to point a finger at someone else than to seriously examine your own beliefs. Now, something strange happened when I started making fun of Randy. He fought back. Now, lots of Christians, especially back then, they did not want to get into an argument. We don't want to cause a scene here. But Randy sat up on his bunk and proceeded to embarrass me about a lot of the things I was saying. Happened the next night, and the next night, and the next night. I was totally confused. Here I am, the most advanced human being in the world. Any discussion with a Christian, especially a Christian so stupid that he turned himself in for 21 felonies, should be a massacre, but it wasn't. Randy had this annoying habit of questioning everything I would say, and when I would try to answer his questions about what I was saying, it would become clear to him and to me that a lot of my beliefs, when put into words, sounded really stupid. So I became so frustrated by this that I started trying to beat him in other ways or to upset him in other ways. I would make fun of him for getting molested when he was a child. I saw his 12-year-old sister in the visiting room, and I said some things about her that I'm not going to repeat here. I'd keep messing with him until he got upset, and when he would finally get upset, I would say, "Look at you, getting angry at me. You call yourself a Christian?" Oddly enough, we became friends. We'd stay up all night playing cards or throwing a roll of toilet paper around like a football or arguing about the Bible. I was still looking for ways to beat him at something. So we got into the world's first ever fasting battle. He wasn't trying to battle, but he would fast for long periods of time, and I would try to beat him just to know that I'd beat the Christian. So for our first round, he fasted for 7 days. And so I had never gone a day in my life without eating, but I went 10 days on nothing but water just to beat this Christian. So we go back and forth, and I'd always fast a couple extra days. Eventually, Randy went 40 days. Picked 40 because Jesus had done it in the wilderness. I said, all right, I'm going 42. Even 6 weeks. I'm going to beat you and Jesus. So I was on the 11th day, and the police told me the guards there told me to pack my bags or put me in a camera cell. They thought I was trying to starve myself to death. I'd fallen down and hit my head, and so, keep in mind, I'm trying to beat the Christian. They think I'm trying to commit suicide really, really slowly. I lost about 80 pounds from fasting. That was from my weight then. This would be like 115 or 120 pounds from where I'm at now. But I lost about 80 pounds from fasting. I developed a horrible rash all over my body. I was having blackouts, falling over. I was getting tunnel vision where I could only see a small area in front of me. The doctor at the jail was threatening to tube feed me. A social worker was saying she was going to have me sent to my third mental hospital. And when I wasn't reading, all I could think about during this time was taking people into the woods and peeling their skin off. But I found renewed purpose in that lonely little cell. With plenty of books at my disposal and nothing else to do, I had a perfect opportunity to prepare for an epic showdown with Randy. I could study the Bible, put together new arguments, go back to E-Block, crush my friend. I asked the chaplain for some Bible studies. He gave me a set of Bible studies from the Gospel of John with graded assignments. So here I am, a rapidly deteriorating atheist, sitting in a poorly lit cell, doing my Bible homework, getting straight A's, haven't eaten in days. And I read about Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry." I'm obsessed with freeing myself from bondage, and then I would read, "If the Son sets you free, you are free indeed." I'm wondering how long I can keep doing this to my body before my heart gives out and I die, and then I read, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies." Pretty creepy. But lying on my back day after day, reflecting on life and theology and philosophy, three things started bothering me. First, there's what's called the design argument. It finally hit me. I was just looking at a wall. I was looking at the way the bricks were stacked up. And I just thought to myself, you know, if someone told me that those bricks went into that simple order by some process that didn't involve intelligence, I would smack the taste out of his mouth. And yet I believe that life, which is vastly more sophisticated, even the simplest life, vastly more sophisticated than some bricks stacked on top of each other, formed on its own, but I accepted that view without ever bothering to question it. And so why did I blindly accept the extraordinary claim that life can form spontaneously from non-life without demanding some very good evidence? Second, I found out how Jesus' apostles died. Most of them went to their bloody deaths claiming that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. My explanation for the origin of Christianity had always been, ever since I went to church with my grandmother, My explanation for Christianity had always been the disciples got together, their guy died, they wanted to keep the movement going, so they make up a story. Then I found out how they died. And if you're ready to die something, it seems like you really have to believe what you're dying for. When a terrorist blows himself up, he is obviously sincere in his beliefs. So the apostles had to believe what they were dying for, which means they really believed that they had seen the risen Jesus. Now, usually when people die for what they believe, it's for an ideology they got from someone else. And that ideology could be true or false. They just happen to believe it. But the apostles were dying for something that they saw. And so the question came, what could have convinced so many different people that they had all seen a resurrected man? The only thing I could think of that could give them that level of confidence was that they had actually seen what they claimed to see. Third, I began to worry that Jesus might be better than me. Now, if you're not a complete moral relativist or a Jesus myther, you probably think it's obvious that Jesus is better than me, but I wasn't the clearest thinker on moral issues in that cell. So it took me a while to get my mind around this, but here's the problem that emerged. I had two beliefs that just didn't go together. On the one hand, I believed that human beings were insignificant lumps of cells and that everything we do is meaningless. On the other hand, I believed that I was the greatest, most significant, most important human being in the world. Now, what sense does it make to say that I'm the greatest, most important, completely insignificant, meaningless lump of cells? Those don't go well together. For there to even be a greatest person, there would have to be some standard. There would have to be something like God, and I obviously wasn't going to be doing very well in the matchup there. So my beliefs were breaking down at a foundational level, and with the foundations falling apart, everything started collapsing. I went from believing that I was the best person in the world to believing that I was the absolute worst person in the world. I sat there thinking, people bring me food every day, and I'm here starving to death. There are other people in the world who are starving, but at least they can think straight. I sit here fantasizing about torturing people. My skin's turning yellow. I'm scratching myself bloody. I can't stop drooling. If someone were to come into my cell right now and beat me to death, I could not put up a fight. Pondering my predicament, I realized that there were two possibilities. Either I was selfish and violent and uncaring, and that's just the way things were, or there was someone with the ability to help people like me. Either I was all messed up and that's just something I had to live with, or there was someone who could deal with this sort of thing. And when you start thinking like that, I'd say you're about 2 inches away from becoming a Christian, because when we ask ourselves who, out of anyone in history, who had the ability to take morally and spiritually shattered people and give them new life, we get a list of one. I still wasn't sure that Jesus was who he claimed to be, but I was sure that it was Jesus or nothing. If anyone has God's stamp of approval, it's the guy who rose from the dead. So I bowed down on my bunk. I didn't know how to pray. When I prayed, I said, God, I don't know if I'm going to believe in you tomorrow, but I'll believe in you right now. If you can do anything with me, you're welcome to it. And I ran through a sinner's prayer type thing that came with the end of the Bible studies. And when I sat up from that prayer, the whole world looked different, like everything was a different color. Felt like I'd been fighting, and I don't mean figuratively fighting. I mean physically brawling my entire life, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. So that was 23 years ago. Was it rational for me to accept Christian theism? I think the appropriate atheist response here is, of course not, David. You were a drooling lunatic. How could anything you thought or did be considered rational in any sense? And that's why we're going to have the rest of the debate to iron out some of these details. But just wanted to get that out of the way. That's why I became a Christian. Now we'll see if it makes sense.
All right, we're going to begin our first rebuttals, and they'll last about 12 minutes.
All right. Let's see if I can use my full time this time. All right, David. I think that was word for word your testimony on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff to talk about with your testimony. But let's iron out a couple things that are Very, very important. And the first, and I think the most important thing, and I think if anybody takes anything away from this tonight, it's that mental health is a serious issue. David, I have my own issues with mental health that are going to be a part of me for the rest of my life. And I'm so sorry. Really. But the way that we should deal with it is through cognitive behavioral therapy and through getting medication. If you want to add your belief on top of that, okay. David, if the only thing that's holding you from murdering somebody is your Christianity, then I hope that you keep your Christianity, not because it's rational, but because it will keep you a part of society. And that's okay. But this debate is about whether or not a thing is rational, and you haven't been able to provide that. So that said, emotions out of the way, really, dude, I'm so sorry. It's something that you fight with every day. No, you know what? Actually, no. I'm getting in on this a little bit more because it's important. You don't wish away your issues. You don't wish away your health. You don't get medicated and pretend like it's all better, because that doesn't make it better. It just helps you survive. You find what your new normal is, and you learn how to cope. You do the best you can, and you live the best life you can with whatever you have. You don't identify yourself by it. That said, I want to go through a couple little things. First, when I left my faith, I didn't actually think I was wrong. I thought, or I didn't actually think there was no God. I thought that I was personally broken, that there must be something wrong with me because everyone else can interact with and understand God, and yet I can't. What's wrong with me? I searched for years. I prayed. I read the Bible over and over. I sat with my pastor. I sat with other pastors. In the end, it was a death by 1,000 cuts, which doesn't provide a great mic drop moment, but there it is. What do I do with that? Well, David's right. We are a tiny planet hurtling through space. Do we have some grand design, some grand plan? It's taken me a long time to find that, you know what, you don't have to. You get to apply your own purpose. And I have. And every day that I work to achieve it, it's something beautiful. It's something amazing. Because I do all of the murdering that I want to do, and it's exactly zero. And I can say that that is true for the vast majority of people in this room. And that's fantastic. Because in the end, we are social creatures, of course. That's what we work toward, right? We work toward building the society and making it a little better for our kids. And you know what? It doesn't matter when I die, because I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that it's the best for the next generation. It doesn't matter if I have children. What matters is that I've worked toward that purpose that I've created. And you know what? That's enough. Moving forward, this is a personal testimony. Understood? Cool. But that doesn't get us any closer to truth. And that's what this debate is about. Essentially, when given the opportunity, this was not a time to talk about the topic. This was a time to share a personal testimony. And if that's, David, how you want to spend your time, that's okay. But I'm going to keep going on about the debate topic. So, there are a couple of things that you said that kind of got me. You said that consciousness is just particles interacting in the brain. I don't know how that makes a lick of difference. In fact, if you're following those particles interacting in the brain, you would know that my brain doesn't produce several of those chemicals, right? It doesn't produce enough serotonin, enough epinephrine, right? It doesn't produce enough of the feel-good chemicals, right? Oxytocin. And that I've got to work towards it. And you know what? That fundamentally changes my personality. It's part of who I am. That's okay. So, is it just particles interacting? That's not a good argument. What that is that's going, It's saying I don't like it, therefore it's not true. It's not a good argument. How about the die for a lie? Well, there are plenty of circumstances plenty of occasions where we've seen cult leaders lead entire groups into mass suicide. And your example about terrorists blowing up buildings, blowing themselves up, is another huge issue. Were they right? Would that make Islam true? No, I think we should probably figure out a way that we can get from point A to point B and be able to determine the difference between them. We just didn't get that in the opening statement. Maybe we'll get that in the rebuttal. There was a point where you said, if skepticism is applied to everything, would it crumble? I apply my skepticism every day to everything I do. Everything that I operate with is tentative, and that allows me to be open to understanding the world around me. I think that's fantastic. I don't presume that I know the answer to something and close myself off to it. When I get that feeling in my gut, aporia, right? That nasty feeling, that I don't know feeling. I trained myself, that's what eureka feels like. Because when you get to explore something, when you find out you don't know, you get to explore it. You get to find out, and you might be able to make the world a little bit better place because you learned a little bit more than everybody else, and you can share that. That's fucking awesome. So, how are we on time? 5 minutes. Nice. All right. Let's break down a couple things. You brought up the argument from design. If you want to talk about watchmakers, if you want to talk about first causes, okay. The debate isn't whether or not a deistic God randomly exists somewhere. If you want to get there, okay, it gets you no closer to a Christian God. So if you want to go down those paths, that's absolutely fine. I feel that's a red herring. I'm trying to help guide you to a place that might be a little bit more productive. But the deistic God's claims do not get you to Christianity. So let's just make sure we're clear on that one. So, what do we think? I sat here. I listened. I had my paper. Do we learn anything about original sin? I think it's clear that for you to rationally accept it, you should have an idea of what the hell it is. What is inherited sin? How does that work? How could we possibly start a story that is pivotal to the entire thing, build the entire structure on a house of cards that says, that we started at Adam and Eve? When? Do you follow that we live in a 6,000-year-old planet? If you do, then I'm happy to tell you that we're at a university. We can walk down and we can study it together because that's what we do. If you follow an old Earth, if you believe that allele frequency over time creates changes, and those changes slowly and subtly make differences in the population, over time, I mean geological time that we can't even possibly understand, we optimize ourselves for the environments that we're in. We've seen it. We've studied it. 3 minutes? I think I'm doing all right. All right. So, let's take a look back. We're following this together. Original sin. We're no closer. We unfortunately didn't get an answer to that. The Trinity. No closer. We didn't get an answer to that. Existence of the soul. The existence of it. I'm not talking about its nature or where you go from there. How about just getting to its existence, period? Because that's what the whole thing is predicated on, isn't it? Right? That we exist after our temporal existence? If we can't get there, how should we possibly rationally accept the Christian theist claim? So, I'll pass it back with original sin. So far still, it's magic. God will sort it out. The Trinity, it's magic. God will sort it out. The existence of the soul, it's magic. God will sort it out. You can take that, but it's not rational. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. In my opening statement, I shared a watered-down PG version of how I came to believe in Christian theism. I liked when Eric said, if the only thing keeping me from killing people is Christianity, he hopes I keep my Christianity. Now, I have a quick question. Why would Christianity be the only thing that keeps me from killing? It seems if you could actually defend some sort of moral claims, then I would simply accept them, right? Full disclosure, I'm a diagnosed psychopath, right? I don't form normal emotional attachments to other people. That's the diagnosis. Now, being a psychopath means I don't have normal emotional reactions to certain things. It doesn't mean I don't understand reasons and arguments. I can understand those perfectly. So, if what you're saying is, wow, perhaps Christianity is the only thing that keeps people like this from becoming violent, if your moral positions and your moral claims are based on actual arguments and evidence, and here is a coherent position that I can explain to you and lay out the arguments for, well, why wouldn't you be able to show me that? When you say you can't, and you can't give me anything that I could understand that would make sense to me as a reason to do one thing rather than the other, and the only difference between me and you is that I don't have certain feelings, it really seems like your system of morality is based on feelings that you developed as you were growing up. And that's exactly the point I realized. I mean, if you recognize this, if you don't have these normal emotional reactions that you've been sort of indoctrinated with as you're growing up, imagine that, and you're sitting there looking back at the situation of morality in the world, and you look, hey, there's a place in Pakistan, and over there, if your sister walks down the street and shows her ankles, you kill her. And they feel as strongly about that as you've ever felt about anything in your entire life. They will kill their sister and then walk right down to the police station and say, I killed her, I had to do it. She showed her ankles on the street. Now, most people in the West would say, no, that's horrible. You don't do that sort of thing. Well, who's right there? Who's right? He feels strongly about his moral positions. You feel strongly about yours. You go to different places, different times. Everyone has these different feelings and so on. If you're looking at this sort of from outside, it just looks like a bunch of nonsense. And the reason I say that is, this ties into the point I made about applying the skepticism, the same skepticism that you apply to religious claims, apply those to moral claims. He says he did. He says he does do that with his beliefs. But think about this. If you actually apply the same think about this. When you apply skepticism to religions, it's like, oh, well, over there they believe this about God, and over here they believe this, and they believe this other thing, and when I challenge them and say, hey, defend what you say, defend your claims, what do they say? They say, oh, I feel it in my heart or something like that, and they start talking about feelings. What a bunch of nonsense, and that's what you conclude. All that religious talk is a bunch of nonsense. Great, apply the exact same reason to moral claims. Over there they believe this is right and that's wrong, and over here they believe the exact opposite, and they believe all kinds of different things, and when I ask them, hey, why should you do this rather than that? They start saying, oh, it's obvious, I feel like that, I have these feelings and so on. How do you not look at that and say, what a bunch of nonsense? Again, exact same reasoning, exact same reasons for rejecting the position. So that's the point. Given atheism without some ground, you're left with that. You're left with basically no defense other than your feelings. So let's go through some of the other things he brought up. He asked, why do I think it's a problem that consciousness is particles interacting in the brain? Well, I didn't bring that up as a problem. I just said that was something that I believed without questioning when I was an atheist, and then it's something that I believed without ever challenging. So I didn't bring that up as a problem, but I do think it's a problem. And it would go something like this. If your thoughts and beliefs are just particles interacting in your brain in certain ways, wow. That is the ultimate rationality underminer there, right? Because think about it. What is a true belief according to this position? A true belief is just these particles led to that. It's all deterministic, right? Particles in your brain are acting deterministically, right? And you can follow, if you had the, let's say, brain power, you could follow those chains of causation all the way back to long before you were born. So when you have a belief right now, according to this worldview, which would be the standard materialistic view, particles interacting in your brain, producing your mental states, that's all just straightforward cause and effect. It's deterministic. So what causes a false belief? It's just particles in motion. They eventually lead up to that false belief. What causes a true belief? Well, particles in motion ultimately lead to this true belief. So the process that leads to either one of these beliefs is exactly the same. You don't really have control over it. That started before you were ever born until those particles actually form your thoughts and beliefs for you. So how do you know, if you have a belief, how do you know whether it's true or false? Well, notice, rationality isn't the real criterion. It's just straightforward cause and effect. So if that's the atheistic perspective, then I would say atheist is the ultimate underminer of rationality. Your thoughts, your beliefs are simply produced not by rational processes, but by blind physical processes. And so that's why I would regard that as a problem, even though I didn't bring that one up. Eric didn't get the point about Jesus' followers being willing to die for their claim that they had seen him. He compared this to cult leaders leading people into mass suicide, and to my point about terrorists blowing themselves up. There's a big difference here. Right. When the apostles died for something that they claimed to have seen, they claimed to have seen a man risen from the dead. That's something they claimed to see, not something they heard from other people, not an ideology that they'd been taught. Right? There are people all over the world right now who are willing to die for what they believe, political positions or religious positions and so on. When they're willing to die for something like that, pretty safe bet that they really believe in what they're dying for. They're not making it, they're not pretending to believe it. So when someone tells me, hey, I believe in this ideology, and I believe it so strongly, I'm ready to die for it. That tells me you really believe in your ideology. It doesn't tell me it's true or not. When someone says, I saw something, and then is willing to die for it, that's where I'm going, okay, what did this guy see? Because he believes that he saw something, what did he see? This is different from hearing something. So just another comparison, because I hope this is clear, and I hope it's clear because this is one of my main reasons that I am a Christian right now. Imagine someone who, let's say you have 10 people who really believe in aliens. And they say, we really believe in aliens. And I say, no, you don't. I'm going to start killing you. They say, you could kill us all you want. And I start shooting them. And they say, you can't stop us from believing in aliens. And then I start asking them why. And they say, well, we watched that. We watched TV shows when we were growing up about aliens. And, our parents told us about aliens and so on. At the end of all that, I would conclude, okay, these people really believe in aliens, but that their belief tells me nothing about whether aliens really exist. It's just stuff they heard and they really believe with a lot of confidence. Compare that with 10 people who say, we got abducted the other day, we were taken aboard the mothership, all these little green dudes started sticking stuff in us, and it really happened. And I say, stop lying. They say, no, it's true. And I start shooting them, and they go, you could kill us all. It's never going to stop us from believing that we were there in the mothership. All right, now they saw something, right? They're claiming there, and they believe that with confidence. Now I would have to start thinking about this, right? What did these guys see that gave them this level of confidence, right? So that's different with a group that really believes something because they heard it, because someone made an impression on them, because they read something, and a group that has witnessed something that provides the foundation for their life and action. So with the apostles, just like if I don't have any position on aliens, but if I saw 10 people and they all said they were taken to the mothership and they're confirming each other's stories and they're willing to die for this claim that they went to the mothership, I would take that very, very seriously. I don't have that there. I do have it with Jesus' apostles. And they were ready to go to their horrible, bloody deaths for their claim that Jesus had appeared to them, risen from the dead. So I have to take that seriously. The design argument. He said that with the design argument, I only brought this up as something that started bothering me, making me wonder why I had accepted the claim that life formed on its own without demanding some sort of evidence. So there it was just applying this idea that I've been manipulated throughout my life and starting to think, wait a minute, I've got more here to look at than just moral claims that are rolling around in my mind. But the idea that this design would get us no closer to a Christian God, well, that's false, right? If my position was naturalism, naturalism is like the main alternative to theism right now. There's some other things in between there, but if it's the main alternative to theism, and Christian theism is a form of theism, then if you eliminate the main rival, it obviously gets you closer to your position. And if you got a designer, then you have to start the God talk. Now for the questions. Can we take the doctrine of original sin seriously? Is it rational to believe in this doctrine? So the idea that there are some parents. Now, what you believe about the age of the earth and how life formed will affect your view of original sin. That's why Christians have different views of original sin. But if you go with some sort of mainstream doctrine, then there are two first parents or something who do something, and then that affects all of humanity. Their decision affects all of humanity because of some sort of broken relationship with God. Now, my objections here would be, one, I'm not sure that's terribly relevant to Christian theism. And the reason I'm saying that is because I became a Christian theist without believing in original sin. There are lots of doctrines that you could believe in, right? So just when I became a Christian, I was a theistic evolutionist. I did not believe in inspiration of Scripture, didn't believe in inerrancy. I believed that Jesus died on the cross for sins and that he rose from the dead and that he is Lord. And those were the requirements. So that's kind of what we would consider mere Christianity. Other Christian doctrines, yeah, you're going to be more or less correct, and you're going to have to explain your interpretations and so on. But you can have a lot of leeway on a lot of issues and still be a Christian, right? So you could be wrong about a doctrine and still be a Christian. And so if we're talking about Christian theism, you can have all sorts of pictures of, all sorts of different views of original sin. But let's take a standard one. If you've got original sin, these two parents, how could that, justly affect the rest of humanity? Well, my brother is a drug addict, and so is his wife, and they had a child, and that child was born addicted to heroin. And notice what the parents did affect doesn't make it a great state of affairs, but like it or not, what parents do can affect and does affect what the rest of us do. So if there is some sort of spiritual break that puts humans in a different status with God, I don't see much of a reason why that wouldn't affect the rest of humanity. So, yep, I have no problem with that. With that said, even if you did have a different doctrine, you could still be a Christian and be wrong about some doctrine. So I'm out of time. I didn't get to a couple of those, but we still got another rebuttal.
All right. So we got a little bit more meat on the bone, so let's dive in. First, I noticed, David, that you started saying that what my beliefs must be, what the atheist worldview must be, naturalism and all. I haven't actually stated it because it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to this debate. But even if I were to share how I think the world works, does that get you any closer to the position that is on trial today? Does it? Because I can think of thousands of different ways that we could explain the universe. I can extemporaneously come up with them, but that doesn't get them to be truer. So why does that become a convincing thing? I don't know. But eliminating results does not get you closer to truth. You need to actually build your own case instead of trying to knock down others. That helps, and I actually encourage you to knock down as many false things as possible, because I want to know what's true about the world. Maybe we can do it together, especially if I'm wrong. I'm willing to be wrong. But in this case, I don't know if there's much to stand on. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. You had said that I had said Christianity keeps people from doing bad things. No, I did not say that. I said, if your Christianity keeps you from doing bad things. And if that's the case, I still hold it. Does Christianity prevent people from doing bad things? I could not possibly tell you. I know that we can look at the available evidence. And if we look at statistically, let's try that word again. If we look at the statistics of people in jail, what's the religiosity? Correlation, not causation, but I think it's time enough to bury that. Let's see, saying that your beliefs satisfied you. Does that really get you to truth? Does that get you to understand actual things about the world? No. And you know that. So how could that possibly be a satisfying response for you? I'm out here pouring myself out, but I'm wondering if you believe that or if you think that that'll just convince the crowd. That's rough. How about your thoughts and beliefs? If it's just brain fizz, right? If it's just particles interacting, then what? Then what does that mean about your consciousness? What does it mean? It's still there. So why would we even, I'm sorry. Let me phrase this out clearly. The argument from Consequent is, I don't like it, therefore it's not true. Example, gays make me feel icky, therefore there are no gays. Does that follow? Right? Pedophilia is disgusting, therefore there is no pedophilia. Are we living in that world? No. So how come you're saying, oh, it's just brain chemistry, it's bad, feels bad. It doesn't get us closer to truth. It doesn't get us closer to understanding the nature of how we think and our cognition. We actually, when we ask the question, what is consciousness? We get to study it and learn more about it. We're learning more about it every single year. It's freaking amazing. The die for a lie, that got brought up. No, I got what you were saying. I don't think you got what my retort was. I'll give you an example. The Mormon faith is founded on the idea that Joseph Smith found golden plates in his backyard in Rochester, New York. That he went and established the Quorum of the 12, the first 12 of his apostles. They all attested to physically seeing the plates. They each individually wrote down their own accounts. We actually have those documents in their handwriting. Can we say the same is true for those accounts in the Bible? No, we can't. And yet, for some reason, you were able to parse your Christianity from Joseph Smith's version and the following Book of Mormon. So I wonder how you make that distinction. These are people who have claimed that they've seen it and died for it. These are people who went on to get cast out city by city until they established Nauvoo. If you want to follow Mormon history, it's freaking amazing. But if you want to find out how many people can say that they've seen a miracle and are willing to die for it, there are tons. Does that make it more true? No, it makes it a tragedy. We should expect better, and we should hope to teach our children just enough so that they don't fall into that trap in the future. Finally, the explanation. I actually really am glad that we brought one up, right? So let's knock it off the top. Original sin. Do you believe that two people did something at some time? I tried my best to quote you, and they broke a relationship with God, and that might be the actual story. Let's be absolutely crystal clear. The salvation story of Jesus Christ is predicated on the idea that each and every one of us is flawed, is broken, and is undeserving of the love and presence of God. That the only way we are able to do that is not through works, but by submitting ourselves to that Christ figure so that we can be redeemed from our original sin, from the thing that we were born with, because according to the Bible, we are all born broken. That is not the same as parents teaching their children bad habits. I'm sorry, but that's a lodestone that is still around your neck and still around the neck of Christianity. So, we're 2 in. Did we get through original sin? We did not. The best we got from original sin is maybe something happened sometime, or maybe it's an allegory or analogy, or maybe it's just a descriptor of the way bad parenting happens. But no, that does not make you a Christian, I believe. But you can decide it on your own. Just let me know, and I'll evaluate the evidence when that time comes. Trinity, still nothing. Still drastically important. It's magic. God will sort it out. Existence of the soul, that entire thing that is supposed to happen. Why was the resurrection of Christ so important? It was because you have a soul, right? That whole idea, you go to heaven or hell, there's something. And how is that not important? Why is that so unimportant that you wouldn't bring it up? I mean, if you're saying that the existence of the soul or the existence of original sin are things that did not convince you, well, then I would say that your belief is irrational. I would encourage you to evaluate the evidence. Thank you.
Thanks again, Eric. He pointed out that atheism isn't the topic here. That's absolutely correct. Atheism isn't on trial, but as I pointed out, atheism is the main going alternative to theism. So again, if this is your main rival and you eliminate atheism, well, now you're in the realm of theism. Well, that does increase the odds of Christian theism, right? If you've ruled out non-theisms and now you've got Christian theism, all right, you need to pay attention to that. Second, even though atheism isn't our focus, Eric's objections are part of this debate. So insofar as they are grounded in an atheistic picture of the world, it makes sense to actually examine whether they're consistent with that worldview, whether they make sense on that worldview. So just to give you an idea, if I said, if I were debating a metaphysical solipsist, right? A solipsist is someone who believes that he's the only thing that exists, right? So if I'm debating a solipsist on whether Christian theism is true, and the solipsist says, well, no, obviously Christian theism is false because I'm the only thing that exists, so your God can't exist. Well, in order to defend my own position, I would need to respond to his, right? So these things are relevant. He says that eliminating results doesn't help your own position. Again, I only brought that up as my thinking in a jail cell. That was my personal perspective in a jail cell. But again, right, there are only so many options on live options, as William James would say, live hypotheses, as William James would say, on the table. If you've got a certain number of live hypotheses and you eliminate some of the big ones, well, then you're left with some other ones, and so it makes them easier to consider and examine. He says if mental states are just brain fizz, well, so what? What does that mean? Again, if that's the position of naturalism, and our question here, our topic is whether it's rational to believe in Christian theism. Well, if the alternative to theism is naturalism and you're stuck with your mental states just being brain states, which are not simply governed by rationality, that just seems that way. These would be your beliefs. All of your cognitive processes are governed by straightforward cause and effect. If you have a false belief, you were determined to have that false belief. If you have a true belief, you were determined to have that true belief. They'll both seem rational to you. You were determined to have them. That does not make them rational. So if that's the position of naturalism, and I don't see any way around it, that's the position of atheistic naturalism, then atheistic naturalism is positively irrational, right? You've just destroyed rationality. We're sitting here arguing, and are arguing, even though it seems like we're really going through these reasons and so on, and we're really trying to get to the truth of this, everything we believe is determined. It's just, as he put it, fizzing in our brain, right? So the fizz happens in your brain, and then you get this experience, like you came up with this new belief and so on. Those were particles in motion. Though you can follow the chain of causation all the way back to before you were born, right? You're born, particles in motion, they produce your brain states, they produce your beliefs, you think it's rational, you think the opposition is irrational. Why do you think that? Because your brain states determined you to think that way. So this would be the ultimate annihilator of rationality. Well, if that's the ultimate annihilator of rationality, then the only position that we could have to establish rationality would be some position very different from that one. And I happen to have such a position. He switched his response to the apostles being willing to die for what they saw, to Mormons writing accounts about golden plates. Well, if I have good reason to believe some Mormons died because they claim to have seen some golden plates, and they're bearing witness to this, and they die horrible deaths and never recant, I would probably believe they saw some golden plates. Now, does that get you to the truth of all of Mormonism? I don't think so. But I would, if I had that, and if a Mormon wants to come and show me that, and then I will say, great, you guys saw some golden plates. Jesus' disciples saw a man risen from the dead. Lovely. Back on the topic of original sin, he said the salvation story of Jesus is based on the claim that each and every one of us is flawed and broken. Well, if that's what you mean by broken, by original sin, that what they did affected us so that we're all flawed and broken, I don't think there's any more empirically verifiable claim in all of history than all humans are flawed and broken. So if that's what's on the line here, great, that's true, and it's obviously true. But again, a lot of these issues, you could have a variety of positions. And if you go to a Christian philosophy conference or a Christian theology conference, you'll have all kinds of positions on these issues. Someone's obviously wrong here. Can they all be Christians? Yes. Well, why? Because it's only a certain number of things that actually put you in the Christian camp. You can have differences on some of the other issues. Again, some will be right, some will be wrong. But that's not exactly Christian theism that demands precise allegiance to every other doctrine that you could ever list. Is it rational to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity? And the other is it rational to believe in the existence of a soul? Well, notice, if all we're stuck with is material, so going back to the issue before, if all we're stuck with on naturalism is physical brain states governed by deterministic cause and effect, and that destroys rationality, what would we need? What would we need in order to have rationality? Well, we would need something like the soul. So he's questioning whether it's rational to believe in a soul when something like the soul would be necessary to even have rationality, because the alternative is just physical processes governed by cause and effect. So if we know that that cannot produce rationality, your only shot at rationality is something like the soul, and so might not want to attack that. Is it rational to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity? Now, what I've noticed here is that we have very different methods. And this doesn't just refer to me and Eric here. You can go to different places, and I notice there are these two camps, right? Some people say, here are the things I know. Let me base my beliefs on these things that I know. And if I have questions over here or things that I'm wondering about, well, let me wonder about those things. But I'm going to base my beliefs on the things that I know. And you have, well, maybe you could know these things, but I really got these questions until all these questions were answered. Well, who cares about those other issues where you actually can list the facts? And I bring this up because whatever the issue happens to be, if people shouldn't become atheists until every question that someone has about atheism is answered, well, then I don't think there would ever be any atheists. But atheists seem to be quite happy having unanswered questions with their own views, not so much when it's when Christians are answering the questions. The doctrine of the Trinity is, so when I say that I base my beliefs on things that I know, I'm not starting with something and saying, hey, that sounds confusing, therefore let me ignore everything else. If I can establish that someone died on the cross and rose from the dead, well, it looks like he's got God's stamp of approval, so I'm going to take his message seriously. If his message involves Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the idea that there's only one God, then I'm going to say, hey, whether that makes perfect sense to me, whether it's confusing to me, if the guy who rose from the dead said it, well, I'm going to stick with it. And if you have a problem with that, if you have a problem with saying, hey, that sounds confusing, one, I mean, you can't do science, you can't do cosmology, you can't do quantum mechanics, can't do relativity. So if you got that, if that's your position, stick with it and abandon science.
All right, we're going to have 5 minutes apiece for our kind of concluding statements, and then we'll move into questions from the audience or comments.
Awesome. All right. I'm still shaking. This is really fun. Okay. So let me try and get as much of this out as I can. When you eliminate atheism, does it get you to theism? We've talked about that. You said it just happened in jail when you were evaluating it. But no, I took that note when you were talking about it right now, about how we should believe now. We can check the tape. But that's fine. I'm here to help. I'm going to go into a little logic. It might be a little boring, but I'm going to do my best. It says, I learned it in 101. The negation of a claim is not its opposite. Right? So the negation of the Christian claim is not atheism. It just means not Christian. It leaves room for a whole lot of things. It leaves room for Buddhism. It leaves room for Taoism. It leaves room for Islam. It leaves room for cults. It leaves room for all kinds of things. Atheism is the rejection of the assertion that a God exists. That means I am not taking a position. I'm just saying you have not provided enough evidence. Just like tonight. It was not rational when you said that if a guy rises from the dead and tells you that the Trinity just works, stick with it. Okay, man. But that's not rational. You have not provided sufficient evidence. Again, why do you need a soul, right? He said, the position about the soul, I'm going to try and say that really quickly. If you get brain damage and you lose your ability to work rationally, does that mean your soul is locked in your body? I just have so many questions. I think we could spend an entire night on the soul. I really wish we would have answered it. Didn't. And you said, if an atheist was only an atheist when every single question about atheism was answered. Absolutely. It is the rejection of the assertion of a Christian God, not a Christian God, just any gods, any theisms, right? So if somebody says, I assert this theism, I am saying, I reject it because you did not give me enough evidence. You have not shown me that it is rational to accept it. Just like tonight. So, no. And yes, I am an atheist. And yes, any other claims that you have when you reject them, that is the atheist position. It is very easy to be an atheist. It is very burdensome to be, Christian, especially tonight. I want to take the time, though, to say David is not necessarily wrong. When we evaluate these things, we're taking a look at the evidence that he's bringing up. We are not necessarily saying that he is wrong because he did not meet the burden of proof. He did not show that it is rational. He did not show that there was sufficient evidence for the claim. What he did is, he tried. But that doesn't mean that he's wrong. He could be right. There could be arguments. There could be evidence. It just did not happen tonight. So, when it comes to the assessment of this debate, is it rational to accept Christian theism? Not tonight, it's not. But hopefully we can have other debates. David, I just want to thank you so much for coming in, and I know that it was last minute, but I absolutely love this. I look forward to us talking. I look forward to us taking audience questions. This was my first. You were all so nice. Thank you. I see a lot of smiling faces. Thank you so much. Time? 1 minute? Yeah, I think you've heard me talk enough. Go ahead, man.
Well, thanks again to the Oklahoma Apologetics Alliance and the Secular Student Alliance for arranging this debate, and to Eric for debating. Tonight, I've made a pretty basic case that Christian theism makes sense of the origin and complexity of life, the origin of human consciousness, the reliability of our cognitive faculties, transcendent moral standard, and the historical facts about Jesus of Nazareth. The alternative is, the only alternative that we have here today is atheism, and I don't believe that atheism can make sense of any of those issues. Now, Eric, in his closing there, said that atheism is simply the position that we haven't given enough evidence. That brings up the question of what amounts to sufficient evidence, because I've noticed for years that for some people, no evidence would ever qualify. And here I'm thinking of, even someone like Richard Dawkins recently did an interview with Peter Boghossian, and the question came up, what evidence would convince Richard Dawkins, if God did exist and wanted to give Richard Dawkins evidence, what kind of evidence would convince him. And the combined brains of Richard Dawkins and Peter Boghossian could not come up with anything that would qualify as evidence for the existence of God. Richard Dawkins even said that if God wrote out a message in the stars, he would just conclude that powerful aliens did it. The Oxford atheist Peter Atkins was asked the same question. What could God do if he did exist? What if God wrote out a message in the stars and you saw it? He said, I would conclude that I've gone mad. He said, even if I died and woke up and I saw St. Peter greeting me at the pearly gates, I would still not believe. Now, why is this relevant, right? Because if you watch responses over the years to arguments like the design argument or the cosmological argument or the moral argument and so on, where the atheists are saying, hey, that's not enough evidence, man. You're just not giving me enough evidence here. Well, if the cat's finally coming out of the bag and no evidence would ever qualify, then that's not the standard for rationality, right? We can always play skeptic no matter what the evidence is, right? I mentioned metaphysical solipsists earlier, right? These are people who believe that they are the only thing that exists. Now, the metaphysical solipsist has a worldview. He has a worldview that he is the only thing that exists. When he looks out and sees all of you, it's kind of like he thinks it's something similar to dreaming. It's a sort of fantasy world he invents to keep himself entertained. So, if you were to argue with a metaphysical solipsist and try to convince him that you exist, what evidence could you possibly give him? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Any evidence you give him, he can interpret within his own framework. Not because he has the true position, but because he's built up a methodology that is impervious to evidence against his position. That does not make metaphysical solipsism a reasonable position. It means you've built up a wall around it that is impervious to evidence. Well, guess what? Atheistic naturalism is the same thing, right? What you see from Richard Dawkins and from others now saying that they would not accept any kind of evidence. They wouldn't accept any kind of evidence. What have they done? Well, here's the natural world. Any evidence you give me for anything that does not conform to my worldview, I'm going to reject it and explain it away. Well, you can do that. No one can stop you from doing that. But if you're doing that, that doesn't mean that you've got the rational position. It means you've built up a worldview that is now impervious to any evidence to the contrary. So that's why it is relevant. That's why it is relevant to address alternative positions, right? If you can show to someone who's not Richard Dawkins, because Dawkins has acknowledged that no evidence would ever count against his position. But for other people who do accept evidence, it is certainly relevant to address positions like naturalism and so on. And when you see that the obvious implications of atheistic naturalism are ultimately destructive to your rationality. If your mental states are simply cause and effect, then they are not rational. They are governed by blind physical processes, and they're not rational. And therefore, again, you do need something like a soul. We've got a designer, and the designer, that puts you in the camp of theism, but if you've got a resurrection from the dead, now you've got Christian theism. And so I would say it's certainly rational to believe in Christian theism. We've got the explanatory power on our side and the power to change lives. Right.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.